let's get into the first fic. I have approval from the author through their profile. I'll quote what it says. I'm open to any transformative works, including art, podfics, translations, and written work inspired by my fics. Yeah. The author is Rosyredlipstick. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure they have a Tumblr account as well as an AO3. And yeah, let's just get right into it. The rating on this fic is general audiences and no archive warnings apply. The category is M/M. And the fandom is Percy Jackson and the Olympians and related fandoms, all media types. This is part 6 of AU Solangelo fics. For the rest of the tags, you can check out the description or go check out their AO3. Now let's finally get actually into it. Okay, and how does this make you feel? By Rosyredlipstick. Summary. I'm a supervillain and you're a therapist I kidnapped. Because I need someone to talk to, AU. Or, where Hades is the ruling supervillain of the world, and Nico can't really deal with that. But you know who can help him? Dr. William Solace, expert psychologist who may or may not be about to be kidnapped. Chapter 1. I'm not kidnapping you, Nico cleared up, right before he peeled off the duct tape off William Solace's mouth. It's not kidnap if I return you. William licked his lips quickly and gave him a hard, surprised look. What the hell are you doing then? Nico leaned back and tipped his hat forward so it shadowed his face. You're a therapist, right? William stared back at him in disbelief and nodded. Yeah, I guess. Nico sighed in relief. Okay, good. So lately I've been going back and forth on the whole evil versus good thing. Like, everyone expects me to be the bad guy, but I'm so tired. Wait. Will interrupted. Did you kidnap me for a psych evaluation? Yeah. Nico ducked his head. Is that okay? You know that you could have scheduled an appointment, right? Will's voice went up at the end. His voice was starting on a hysterical edge, something that Nico didn't really want from his temporary therapist. Nico held up his hands quickly. I'm the son of one of the most powerful supervillains on Earth. Do you think I'm just able to call up a doctor's office and go, no doctor, I've had this bad pain in my arm. My name? Oh, just Nico D'Angelo, direct descendant of Hades. Ruler of evil, Nico scowled. The tabloids alone make that impossible. Thus kidnapping? Will screeched, his wrists still bound. Nico nodded seriously. Thus kidnapping. Will looked at loss for words. You... He blinked and stared at Nico in angry disbelief. Nico gave a short, quick shrug that caused Will to huff and go quiet for a moment. In that moment he seemed to collect himself, resignation behind it. Asked, how's your relationship with your father? Nico laid back into the wall of the van they were currently camped in. He's a good dad, he really is. He used to help me and my sisters with our homework, and he's always home for dinner. He treats us with respect, but he's also a supervillain. Will nodded. And your sisters? How do they react to your father? He and Hazel have an occasional fight, mostly because Hazel's dating this new guy who's all the good of humankind, or something like that. He and Bianca fought all the time before she ran off to join this all-girls human rights group. Nico pulled his knees and rested his chin. Does the topic of your sister make you uncomfortable? Will observed, shifting in his rope binds. Will must have come to the conclusion that this was, in fact, his life. Nico shrugged and averted his eyes. I guess. Just feels kind of like she abandoned me. Bianca took care of me the most after our mum died, and now I haven't talked to her in years. Bianca and Hazel were never close. She left right before Hades found out that he had another daughter, so they never really got to know each other. Will hummed under his breath, which seemed to prompt more talking out of Nico. And they're both edging on the border of being good, standing in the white light and all. Bianca's out there fighting against Hades every day, and I know Hazel's moving in with Frank, her boyfriend, as soon as she turns 18, and I'm just here, in the middle. Have you expressed these ideas to your father? Nico shook his head sharply. After losing Bianca to the good, she is might as well dead to him. He refuses to talk to her or about her, and he can't stand to think that Hazel and I might feel the same way as Bianca. Will nodded, and Nico had a feeling that if he could, he would be taking notes. Nico appreciated how seriously he was taking this. And how does that make you feel? He waved his hands. I don't know, frustrated, annoyed, trapped. Are you asking me or telling me? Will asked, watching him critically. Nico licked his lips and mulled his thoughts that maybe this wasn't a good idea. Telling, I guess? Will nodded and tipped his head to the side. Do you characterize yourself as a bad guy? Nico hung his head and in a small voice answered, I don't know, maybe. I don't want to, but I've grown up with it. It's all people know as me as. You aren't born evil, Nico, Will tells him gently. It's up to you whether you follow your father's or sister's path. Perhaps you'll pave your own path. But that's it. That is all up to you. I think you should try and reconnect with your sisters. I mean, you've developed a relationship with, evil? Yeah. It isn't that strong, right? Nico rolled his eyes and gave him a look. I'm 18 and I've already kidnapped my first person. My relationship with evil can't be that weak. I'm your first? I'm so flattered. Nico leaned back and groaned, rubbing his heels of his hands deep into his eyes. It was like an intense eye massage. Maybe he should kidnap a masseuse next time. So, reconnect with my sisters? That's what I should do? That is my advice, yes. But only do if you feel completely comfortable in your decision. Also, please let me go. Oh! Nico jumped forward and began untying the ropes around Will's wrist. Yeah, I'll have one of my father's minions or someone drop you off where we got you. Will rubbed his wrist for a second before reaching into his pocket. Nico froze for a second, fearing that he was reaching for a weapon or a cell phone to call the police with, or worst of all, get a picture or video of the famous Nico D'Angelo spilling his emotional guts. The tabloids would eat that up. Instead, he pulled out a worn leather wallet and slipped a thin card into Nico's surprised hands. Next time, just come during office hours. Nico held onto the card tightly. Even after Jules Albert dropped Will Solace back off at the parking lot, picked him up at? Kidnapping was such a harsh word, and Will was a man, not a kid at all. Nico ran his fingernail over the raised ink text on the business card and quickly, without risking too much thought, programmed the number into his phone under a false name. He quickly burned the card soon after. The evidence was too risky to enter into the D'Angelo manor. Nico sighed as the car approached his living space. The black, looming columns seemed to lean in and suffocate him. The steel door, with numerous different locks, encryptions, and code words, wasn't welcoming at all, and seemed to be only serve as a reminder of how trapped he was under his father's roof. The final dark colour was a harsh, stark contrast in comparison to the blue in Will Solace's eyes. After the long events that was getting into the manor, he dragged his feet across the carpet, exhaustion hitting him all at once. It was then he stopped in his tracks at the glowing light curling out from under Hazel's door. He swallowed and promised his exhaustion relief at another time, before curling a fist and gently knocking on his sister's door. She answered a few moments later, surprised with the phone clenched in her right hand. Her hair was in wild ringlets, and a stark stench of nail polish pushed out of the room like rough waves. Hey Hazel, can we talk? Will Solace didn't look up as he crossed the threshold and shut the door behind him, his keys dangling from one hand and plastic grocery bags grasped in the other. He didn't react as he crossed the plush carpet to set the bags on the counter. His only out-of-the-ordinary motion was the flicking of a small pocket knife. In a single smooth motion he turned, flipped the lights on, and had his knife at the ready. Oh, he breathed out, it's just you. Nico D'Angelo leaned against the counter, his hand buried in a box of teddygrams. Just me, he mimicked. Why do they think I deserve a better response than that? Will rolled his eyes and dropped his knife but didn't snap it back together. Instead he rested it on the counter, easily within reach. He began to unpack his groceries. What's for dinner? Nico asked, pushing himself up on the counter and popping another crack into his mouth. He leaned over and tried to peer into the bags. I'm starving. Well, I'm having 4 cheese pasta. I don't know what you're having, Will told him, but his hands were busy measuring out portions for 2. Told a different story. Sounds delicious, can't wait. Do you break into my apartment for any particular reason? Will tried to snap, but with no real force behind it. Nico sighed and took another bite of the stolen crackers. So I talked to Hazel. You did? Will asked, his voice free of any dominant emotions. He seemed absorbed in his current task of washing the tomatoes. Nico took a breath. Yeah, turns out she's leaving earlier than planned. In about a month, actually. She wants me to go with her. This revelation made Will freeze slightly, but it went unnoticed in Nico's distracted mind. He continued to talk. I don't really know. Like, as bad as my dad is, he's still my dad, you know? And he loves us, like a lot. When I say that he'll do anything for us, I'm not exaggerating. I can't just abandon him like that. But I can't just live a life of evil either. That's just not who I am. Will swallowed and kept up the illusion of being busy by starting to slice the mushrooms. Do you see yourself being more as a bad guy or a good guy? He asked casually, the forced tone perfected over years in the fields. Nico dropped his head. I don't know how to be a good guy, he snorted. Hell, breaking into your apartment is one of the easiest things I've ever done. Not because your security system is crap or anything. By the window in the second bedroom is no longer covered by your system, but because I'm so used to it. Will hid his annoyance behind a snort. That's reassuring, he told him sarcastically. He eyed the sadness that was radiating off the other boy. Come on, we'll talk about your problems after dinner. Now, if you plan to eat my food, you're going to have to work for it. Will pointed his sharp knife in the direction of the cabinet. Get the cheese grater and get to work. This 4 cheese pasta isn't going to make itself. Why, William Solace, do you always wine and dine your favourite patients with such extravagant manners? Will rolled his eyes. You're not my patient. You're just someone who has a bad tendency to do illegal things in order to talk to me. And this is hardly extravagant. Nico tipped his wine glass towards him. Doesn't change the fact that I'm your favourite, but I'm not the one who busted out the big fancy red juice, am I? Will took a long sip of his own wine. It would seem he would be needing it for the night ahead. Don't push it, Angelo. I might talk away your juice. And are you even old enough to be drinking alcohol? Nico shielded his glass away from Will. I'm almost 19, he argued. It's close enough. And I'm Italian. I've been drinking wine with dinner since I was, basically born. Will swirled his pasta around his fork. I doubt that. But he made no move to take away Nico's glass. What would your father say about your underage drinking? Nico barked out a laugh. Really? You think my father, ruler of all evil, would be opposed to me sipping on some cherry wine at dinner? Will shrugged good-heartedly. Some parents have strict house rules. Nico leaned forward to catch the spark in Will's 2 blue eyes. And yours? What were your parents like? I don't share personal information with my clients, Will told him, the line dull as if it was a word he had to use a lot. It's unprofessional. Nico took a bite out of his pasta and spoke with his mouth full. So you admit I'm your patient? Will caught himself, or at least his words caught up with him, his cheeks coloured by his mistake. Nico dismissed the last words to pursue a new route of information. So tell me, Will, and just forget for a moment that I've read and studied the entire file the national government has on you. Is there a Mr. or Mrs. to keep you company? The national government has a file on me? Of course they do, Nico answered dismissively. Back to my question. Anyone keep you warm at night? Will gave him a look. You already know the answer to that. What about you? How's the latest celebrity the National Enquirer has decided to pair you up with? Oh, it was TMZ actually. And he's doing great, just wonderful. Also, I fear I may be cheating on him with a cross-starred lovers storyline. Last time I checked, Star Magazine was telling me I was dating Jason Grace, son of politically important good guy Zeus. Will hummed. Sounds confusing. Maybe you should seek therapy to help you sort it all out. Nico hid a smile behind a mouthful of pasta. You know, I've been considering it actually, but I can't find one with convenient hours. I have a similar problem with my clients. They all schedule to meet during my office hours. Will shook his head. It's irritating. Don't they know that all my free time is after work? It seems we'd be perfect for each other. Nico began to rip his garlic bread to dip into the sauce. In theory, it seems. Nico slurped up his pasta. I don't know. It seems to be working so far. Will didn't argue, but he didn't voice agreement either. Instead, he asked, How's your sister doing? Nico's eyes flicked down, and Will made a careful mental note about that. She seems happy with her plans, and she really wants me to go with her. She has this whole elaborate scheme to escape our father, which involves emancipating herself and running off to some camp in San Francisco. Nico sighed and took another bite out of his dinner, thinking over his next words. I want to go with her. Will put down his fork and focused on him. But I can't leave my dad, Nico finished for him. Will licked his lips as he thought. It was very distracting for Nico. Do you think your father would ever retire from evil? Will suggested. Nico shook his head sharply. Bianca tried that approach for years before she ran off. There was once when she came close to convincing him. He booked a press conference and everything to announce it, but it fell through, as always. Have you ever tried to talk to him about it? Nico leaned back into his chair. His dinner was growing colder as he made no more motions to continue eating it. He just ignores me whenever I try and bring it up. Will continued to eat his dinner. I think you should approach him about it before you make your decision on whether you to go with Hazel or not. Nico nodded but kept his gaze glued to the wooden floors of Will's small dining room. He suddenly felt like he was intruding. That makes sense, he finally said, more to break the unbearable silence than to agree. But, Will interrupted, I have one major rule in my counselling. Only follow my advice if you are comfortable with it. Nico glanced up to meet Will's incredibly earnest and open eyes. They were truly an incredible shade of blue. Nico swallowed. Yeah, okay. I'll talk to him. Nico scrambled to his feet and jabbed a thumb over his shoulder. I should get going. His voice was apologetic. My family will be expecting me soon. Will nodded and wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin he had draped over the table. Nico took one last long drink of his wine, emptying the glass. He was pleasantly warm, and the feeling was not unfamiliar. Nico supposed having a father as one of the most powerful men in the world came with certain perks, like hugely expensive rich wines. Will showed Nico the door, and Nico shifted his weight uncomfortably before opening his mouth. Hey! Nico stopped before he could fully cross the doorway. How did you know someone was in your apartment? Will grinned, fooled and a little sharp. Now, Nico, you must know that I can't reveal all my secrets. Anyway, if I tell you, how will I know next time you're here? Nico bit his lips and tugged at the end of his hair. Next time, echoed through his mind. He waved his hand in goodbye in response, not knowing how to answer. Where to, boss? Jules Albert questioned once Nico was settled comfortably in the back of the limo. The manor, he replied curtly. His mind seemed to be focused on other topics for the moment. Read, other topic as blonde hair, blue eyes, sharp humour, and a curled grin. You're out of Cheez-Its. Will didn't even bother hiding his obvious surprise. He only paused in the act of selecting a carton of strawberries and blinked. And how, Mr. D'Angelo, would you know that? Nico strolled up behind him and pulled his beanie down to cover his inky hair. I got bored of waiting for you in your apartment. Also, I ate the rest of your Pringles. Will's sigh could barely cover the sound of his amusement, mostly aimed at Nico's poor disguise. You suck at going incognito. Will pulled the beanie over Nico's eyes with one hand. And how did you know I was here? Nico scowled and pulled his hat back before pushing a pair of thin, wired glasses onto his face. His movements were loose and lazy, but there was a tenseness under that facade that Will was trained to identify. Nico rolled his eyes and blew air up into his bangs. How did I know that you would go grocery shopping every Thursday after work? Gee, it's a mystery that'll never be solved. Will hummed and continued to push the shopping cart. It seems that someone is particularly snippy today. Nico deflated a bit and pointed down the aisle. Low on cereal. Oh crap, I totally forgot. Will backpedaled and turned to examine the colourful boxes with ruthless scrutiny and determination. Nico groaned. As someone who has the tendency to eat a lot of your food, I am begging you, please, don't get that disgusting healthy cereal. Will shot a glare at him. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, Nico. You shouldn't swallow a bowl of sugar first thing in the morning. It's not good for you. Nico glared at the box of unfrosted Wheaties Will had lovingly placed in the cart before chucking in a box of Honey Smacks after it. Will gracefully ignored him and made no move to remove the sugary candy disguised as breakfast as he continued down the aisle. So, are you just going to eat my food and spend my money, or are you going to test my ability to follow the ACA code of ethics as well? Will asked as he looked over the boxes of pasta. I'm not spending your money, Nico protested as he threw a box of pizza Pringles into the cart. I'm paying you back. Will snorted and shook his head with a grin. Nico really enjoyed that smile. He turned his head to wrinkle his nose at the Pringles. Those are disgusting, Nico. At least pick up some sour cream and onion too. Nico complied, tossing in a separate cylinder of chips. Nico caught the eye of a nearby middle-aged woman and quickly looked away, tightening his loose flannel and fidgeting with his unfamiliar glasses in the process. Anything else? Will asked, mostly to himself. Milk, Nico reminded him. You're almost out of it and you'll need some if you want to make macaroni later this week. Will raised his eyebrows. Who said I'll make macaroni later this week? Nico nodded towards the no less than 6 boxes of Kraft mac and cheese that he had thrown in the cart when Will was looking at the sauces. I'd say you were, by the looks of it. Will rolled his eyes and took 4 of the boxes out. Don't you eat at home, he questioned, slight concern sleeping through his words. Nico shrugged. Big, extravagant dinners, yeah, but sometimes. Nico held up a box. A boy just needs his ramen noodles. Will sighed. Those are so bad for you. You're helping me bring all this junk up into my apartment, Will told him as he paid. The elderly clerk who was helping him check out kept shooting confused, lingering glances at Nico. Nico shrugged as he flipped through the glossy gossip magazines to hide his image. Yeah, sure, whatever. I thought you were some kind of health food nut, Nico observed from under the red and gold arches. The drive-thru was lit up in bright whites and yellows. The fake glasses still rested on his face, as did the overbearing beanie. Anyways, didn't we just buy like a ton of groceries? I don't feel like cooking tonight, Will told him. Besides, I've never been good at denying myself life's easier pleasures, Will told him, his gaze a little too heavy and lasting a little too long. Nico felt his skin tighten a bit under the attention, and any sarcastic, witty comment was fumbled in the remaining emotion. Will was the first to break from the moment. He glanced away and cleared his throat, and just like that, the air was cleared. What do you want? Whatever, Nico told him, still a little dazed from the emotion, and maybe a little from the blueness in Will's eyes. I don't care, he added, trying more to convince himself in terms of his mental dilemma rather than his fast food order. He leaned back in the passenger seat and tried to ignore Will's voice. Will responded, the tone in his voice sounding like a smirk, but Nico didn't listen to any of the words. A few minutes later, Nico was scaling down at his lap. This is not what I meant. Nico bit out from over the red and yellow box. A yellow smile was painted back at him. You said whatever, Will reminded him, handing him another Happy Meal, presumably his own. I got us chicken nuggets, and hey, we got toys. Will grinned up at him and beamed a little boyish, a little genuinely excited. Nico tried not to face palm the airbag out of frustration and attempted to smile in return. Yeah. Nico fished out a warm, salty fry and popped it into his mouth. At least we got toys. Will pulled into one of the closest parking spots before pulling his own Happy Meal into his lap. So how did your talk with your father go? He asked absent-mindedly as he picked through the box to find the small container of chicken nuggets. He made a small sound of victory as he successfully pulled them out. Nico bit his lip and took a mouthful of fries in order to have more time to think over his words. Okay, I guess. A little bad. Bad? Will questioned as he dipped his nuggets into the sauce. Yeah, Nico ducked his head and pulled off the fake glasses. They were useless now. The setting sun meant the shadows would be able to hide him better than any disguise could. Will didn't say anything. Instead, letting Nico think over his words without distraction, he munched on his meal quietly, listening instead to the faint loop of some pop song playing softly on the radio. I kind of told him I'm moving out, Nico finally revealed, glancing up at Will. His dark eyes were rimmed in pink and his pale skin was covered in blotchy red dots. Oh, Will blinked. Is that something you've been thinking about for a while? Nico took a long sip of his drink. Not really. His voice was low. I mean, it crossed my mind, but more in a way of just wanting to be my own for a while. Not how it happened. Will cocked his head to the side. What do you mean? Nico swallowed the burn in his throat. I kind of made of choose. Keeping up his life of evil, or I move out. I see, Will sighed. I'm very sorry, Nico. I just don't get it. How can he say he loves us more than anything, but then he just lets this lifestyle take not only one, but 2 children from him? Nico faced Will. I don't understand how he could just not care so much. He barely blinked after I gave him the choice. He just handed me a blank check and told me to go find an apartment. Will set down his meal and faced Nico full on. Nico, you need to understand that everyone is afraid of something. Everyone. Even the most powerful snake is afraid once they are faced with a lion. It is possible that your father is afraid of what he doesn't know, such as a life without evil. What is he without evil? He's a dad, Nico bit out, his eyes glassy with emotion. He's my dad. I know this, Nico, Will reminded him kindly. Perhaps if you remind him he is more than just evil, more than just a bad guy, he will reflect on this. I think you should consider talking to him once more, without such a big confrontation, before you decide to move out or follow your sister. These next few decisions could shape how your relationship is with your father for the next few years. I don't want to lose my dad. Nico's voice cracked and he lowered his voice. But I can't live like this anymore. If he does love evil more than me, and he chooses that over me, he's already lost to me. You shouldn't say that. Holding grudges isn't good for anyone, Will advised. People make mistakes. If he does go through with that decision, you might have to accept that that is one of his mistakes. Nico swallowed roughly and tried to hold his emotions at bay, but it was a useless attempt. A few tears dripped from his eyes and onto his dark jeans. He turned away to hide his face, but it was too late. He felt Will shift in his seat beside him. Nico tried to make himself as small as possible as he grabbed the bundle of papers on the dashboard and separated a few of them. I'm sorry, Nico muttered as he rubbed the scratchy napkins into his already red eyes. Don't apologize for crying, Will told him kindly, taking his hand and pulling the crumpled napkins from his fist. Crying is perfectly natural, healthy way to express sadness. You shouldn't be ashamed that your body is reacting to an emotion. Will gave him a small, sad smile and carefully dabbed the napkin under Nico's wet eyes. There, he whispered, carefully folding the napkin only to discard it on the floor of the car. All better. Nico swallowed and his eyes flicked up to meet Will's. Thank you for letting me do this. Will grinned, and he was beautiful under the red and gold fluorescent lights. Hey, there's no better time and place for a session than 8 at night in the McDonald's parking lot. Will laughed and began to dig around in his Happy Meal box. And hey, he held something else up. At least we got Beanie Boos. Nico laughed weakly before following Will's example and pulling out his own toy. A pink elephant, Will grinned in approval. I got the blue owl. Why do they do that anyway? They could be teaching some small, impressionable children that all owls are blue, and then they'll just cause more confusion down the road. I think the children will be fine, Will, Nico told him, pulling the small plush toy out of the plastic wrapper. He glanced at Will's radiant grin and felt his mood grow significantly better. Will bumped their shoulders. What are you going to name yours? I think I'm going to go with Soren. He tipped the small blue owl towards Nico with a thoughtful look. Don't you think? I think it's the sparkly beak that really gives its personality. Nico snorted. You're ridiculous. Will laughed and reached out. Come on, let me see. Nico raised his eyebrows and held the stuffed elephant out of Will's reach. Now, William, I wasn't aware that this was a you show me yours, I'll show you mine kind of deal. He smirked at Will's blush. Maybe my elephant isn't comfortable in your hands. Will leaned forward. Your elephant, huh? He reached a hand through his hair and grinned. Is that what the kids are calling it these days? Nico chapped his jaw closed and slapped a hand over his mouth to smother his sudden laugh. The laugh felt rough in his raw throat, and he cleared his throat once before speaking. Will, he exclaimed with a grin. Just take it. Oh my god. Nico tossed the toy over to the other boy. I can't believe you, he muttered with a smile. Cheered you up, didn't I? Will smiled cheekily. And I believe I found a name for your elephant. Oh? Will questioned before pushing the rest of his uneaten meal into the Happy Meal box. Will hummed, tossing the small elephant back and forth in his hands while his owl sat in his lap. I'm naming it Sunshine. Nico looked up. Sunshine? He questioned. Everyone, but especially you, Nico D'Angelo, could use a little sunshine in their lives. He tossed the elephant back into Nico's awaiting hands. He can be an adorable little plush reminder of that. Nico smiled softly instead and focused on how the ends of Will's blonde hair glowed under the attention of the golden lights, and how loose and happy his eyes and smile were. I could deal with that, Nico muttered softly. Now, come on, we have to get home. The frozen vegetables are going to completely defrawl at this point, and I don't feel like marching grocery bags full of soup up my 2 flights of stairs. Nico rolled his eyes, but reached over to buckle himself in. Don't be overdramatic, Solace. Don't worry, I'll leave that up to you, Will smirked and pulled Nico's beanie off. I do know how you love getting all dolled up for me. Nico playfully scowled, and, even with the fake frown in place, felt better than he had in a while. You locked your window. Will paused and pulled the phone away so he could stare at the unknown number label before he brought the phone back up. Nico, is that you? Hello, Will. How are you doing? Great, good to hear. Are the introductions now over? Good, great. Now let me in. How'd you get my cell phone number? Will asked, toning down his music, but making no move to get up. You gave it to me the night we, met, remember? I gave you my office number, Will reminded him slowly. Oh. The word was loudly lacking any trace of confusion. Well, it wasn't that hard to find. You should be more careful on who you give your cell phone number to. Yeah, I wouldn't want some guy to call me at 8 o'clock at night and demand to be let in my house. That'd be the worst. Anyways, why didn't you just use your normal tactics to break into my apartment? Nico let out a frustrated sigh into the phone, and he only sounded a little pissed. Like I said, you locked your window. Not just locked it, you double-locked your window. Will, I can see the padlock from outside. Will grinned and cocked his head to the side. Are you outside my window right now? Of course not, Nico dismissed. I'm outside your door right now. Will huffed out a laugh and cradled his phone to his cheek. How do you even know that I'm home right now? Is that a joke? Nico questioned. Will, I can hear you shitty singing along to that same shitter pop song. Will cut himself off mid-lyric. I'm not singing, he insisted. He crept over to the door and peered through the peephole. Will jerked in surprise, as Nico was staring straight into the peephole, looking much, much better than he had any right to. His lips were pink and parted, and his dark eyelashes fawned across his rosy cheeks, and he had a large bag weighing down his shoulder. Are you planning on letting me in? His voice echoed in his ear, and he watched Nico's sweet lips curl around the words. He cursed to himself quietly and attempted to calm down his rapid heartbeat. What, so you can eat my food and trash my apartment? Will's voice was a little breathless and light. He swallowed and willed his cheeks to turn down a shade. He opened the door and blocked the doorway, staring Nico down. Is there something you need? He asked playfully, cocking his hip out so he could lean against the wood. Nico gave him a look and pushed past with an exaggerated eye roll.
Where's the pizza rolls? Or mac and cheese? I've had a terrible day. I need to stuff my face with empty calories and saturated fats. Freezer and pantry, but you already knew that. Will followed him into the kitchen, secretly pleased and only slightly alarmed with how comfortable Nico was manoeuvring around his apartment. He threw his bag on the couch and made a beeline for the kitchen. Want to talk about it?
Nico groaned, pulling the large pizza rolls out of the freezer. Preheat the oven and we'll talk about it during/after I've stuffed my face with fake cheese and pepperoni. Will did as requested and pulled a cylinder of chips from the shelf. You want these? They're the gross flavour you like and they're going stale. Nico made grabby hands and a low, whining noise. Will shook his head and tossed the chips over. How's Sunshine doing? Will asked, hopping up onto the counter and letting his feet dangle. Nico's cheeks coloured a nice pink. He's, doing great. For a stuffed elephant, I mean. How's Soren? He's wonderful, actually. Will kicked his feet against the cabinets. He's sitting on the tallest shelf of the bookshelf in my office. Nico cocked his head to the side. I kind of forgot you had an office. Will laughed. It's a nice office. You should see it sometime. Nico hummed under his breath as he put the pizza rolls in the oven. Maybe I will. He pressed the timer button and stood there for a moment, absorbing the heat from the oven. Nico turned to him, a bit awkward, with his hands stuffed into his back pockets. The cylinder of Pringles was tucked under his arm. Want to binge watch Cupcake Wars on Netflix with me? How do you know I have Netflix? Will asked, his voice more teasing than serious. Nico leaned forward with a tisk. Oh, Will. He shook his head in mock pity, and he tucked a stray curl behind Will's ear before he could lean away. Or worse, lean in. You shouldn't be surprised when I know these things about you anymore. I should be probably more worried about the interest you've taken in me, Will decided. Nico patted his quickly warming cheeks and nodded with the faint curl of a smile. Yeah, but you're not. Will really wanted to deny that, but honestly, he just couldn't. You seem really comfortable here, Will remarked. Nico reached into a closet he somehow knew held the blankets and pulled one out. Will tilted his head. Do you come here when I'm not home? Nico shrugged, and Will could spot the secret tension that was held in the moment. On occasion, he answered vaguely, settling onto Will's couch with the container of chips. You have HBO and Game of Thrones is back on. Nico went quiet, and his body was too still as Will thought over his words. Will thought about how nice it was to see the funny little notes Nico would leave, or coming home to the dishes done and dinner warming on the oven. Okay, Will accepted, nodding. He thought it would feel more strange or alarming if he ever realised someone came into his apartment without his permission. Instead, Will realised it felt a lot warmer. What happened today? Will asked once Nico had settled in with his food. Nico sighed and gave him an obvious look, popping a still steaming pizza roll into his mouth. Have you even been outside today? Flipped on the news? Checked Facebook? Nico raised his eyebrows. Have you contacted the outside world at all today? It's my day off, he defended, and my internet was down for a few hours this morning, so I've been listening to music. Nico tipped his head forward dramatically before unzipping his large bag and pulling a glossy magazine from the top. He tossed it over to Will so he could look at the front page. Before Will could react or even glance at the cover, he went back to angrily ripping the rolls apart and dunking them in sauce. Playboy heir to evil fortune goes good, Will read off. He observed it for a moment before asking, why in the world do they think you're a playboy? Nico groaned. Will, that is totally, really not the point. Someone leaked to the press that I'm moving out because Hades picked his life of evil over his own son. And the fact that calling me a playboy doesn't mean anything. But do you agree with the title? Will inquired, leaning forward in mock seriousness. Nico rolled his eyes and pulled out another magazine, a different one but still splashed with Nico's face across the cover. The article is even worse, he muttered, all about how Hades is losing another kid and all the my secret meetings I've been having with the good guys. You've been having meetings with good guys? Will asked, a bit distracted as he flipped open the magazine to discover even more photos of Nico. Nico huffed. I met with Frank, my sister's boyfriend, once, because she wanted me to pick up a few things from his house. But it was far, so we just met halfway at Starbucks,
Apparently, that was enough for an entire news article. But other than that, no! The closest good person I've been meeting with on a regular basis is, well, you. But you're not mentioned in any of those magazines. And honestly, I'm pretty sure I would be able to persuade you in the other direction if I needed to. So you don't count. Hey, he protested before stopping to think about it. Probably. He watched Nico unload more and more magazines out of his bag. A lot of the magazines having multiple copies. How many did you buy? He questioned in confusion and a bit of alarm. I bought out all of the magazine booth on the way here, Nico answered, distracted as he flipped through another magazine, his pizza rolls going untouched. All the other bags are in the van. Bags? As in plural? He eyed the large, heavy black bag that Nico kept pulling magazines out of. You shouldn't read that stuff. Most of it is fake anyway. Who cares? I do, Will. Nico curled up the magazine so he could grip it tightly. This is my image, Will. This is what people are going to see me as. If I ever want to do something with my life, to be something other than the son of an evil ruler, then I need to protect my image. No one wants a rich, spoiled playboy to work for them. To emphasize his words, he waved around one of the magazines, the large yellow letters reading, "Lover boy, seize the light. I am not my father's son." Nico leaned back, worn out now. I would never say that, he muttered softly, his gripping hands wrinkling the glossy paper. His fingers lightly traced over the bright letters as he sighed. Nico faced Will, a small smile in place as he repeated Will's words back to him, but only laced in disbelief. And why the hell do they think I'm a playboy? It's probably the skinny jeans, Will remarked before he could stop himself. He fought off a blush at Nico's sharp, knowing gaze. What? They're practically a sin. I'm surprised you didn't get holy water flicked at you on the streets. Nico seemed to perk up at his opportunity and gave Will a low smirk. The air almost instantly thickened as he spoke. Are they, Will? Are they truly sinfully tight? Do I need prayers? Tell me something. Nico bit his lip and leaned in, his eyes heavy and heated. Do you pray for me? Will's throat was dry and he struggled to swallow. What? Nico dropped his eyes and his eyelashes fluttered against creamy cheeks. Do you pray for me? He repeated, his voice smooth like silk, but heavy like granite. He said words with deep meaning, like they were his own person's sermon. After all, with all the sinning I seem to do, it would seem almost rude of you not to. Will took an even breath, and it was hard to breathe evenly, like this wasn't affecting him the way it obviously was. Will caught a quick spark of humour flash in Nico's eyes, and he had to sigh to control himself. I don't discuss personal religion with my clients, he answered. His voice was breathless, but thankfully didn't crack. Nico's face broke then, cracking into a wide, wicked grin. The heavy air was temporarily lessened, and Will jerked back, not even realising he was leaning closer to the other boy. Nico's grin read of smug flirtation. I thought I wasn't your client. Will shook his head and felt Nico shift closer to him. You're not my client, he told him, lying to himself a bit. Right, Nico dragged out, picking back up his magazine and holding it up so Will couldn't see him. Slightly illegal things, got it? Will pulled down the magazine so it wasn't blocking Nico's face anymore. You shouldn't read that stuff. Will pulled it from his hands gently, and Nico only resisted for a second. Come on, cupcake wars, remember? Nico sighed and fell back onto the couch. His abandoned pizza rolls were still slightly steaming on the coffee table, and he pulled them onto his lap. Yeah, okay, but you better not talk, especially during the final round. Hazel always tries to talk, and it drives me crazy. I wouldn't dare, Will told him, but stopped to think about it. Actually, maybe I will. It could be sweet payback. Payback? Nico questioned, pausing in the act of choosing an episode. What in the world have I done? Nico D'Angelo. Will sighed with humour. If talking during TV is what drives you crazy, then you drive me absolutely insane. Nico smiled, and it was a happy sort of smile. Pleased. He was pleased with himself. I drive you insane? Will dragged his eyes over Nico's sharp pink lips, currently wrapped around the edge of a pizza roll, and the little drop of sauce that smeared around one corner of his mouth. He eyed that sinfully tight jeans that he loved to see on Nico, and his pale skin and flushed cheeks, and the curled ends of his hair. "Yeah," he answered finally, and his voice was only a little weak with emotion. "You drive me insane." "Honey, I'm home," Will greeted dryly. Nico barely looked up from his blanket nest in front of the TV. He gave him a small salute and a grin. "Join me, Doctor, and be quiet. The season finale of Walking Dead is on, and I'm not getting distracted by your thinking." Will dropped his satchel at the doorway, and it spilled open with a clatter. But he ignored it, exhaustion taking over his desire for cleanliness. The few steps to the couch felt like miles away, and when he finally collapsed onto the couch, all he felt was relief. He eyed the highlighters and pencils rolling out of his bag and tried not to be bothered by it. "Long day at the office, Sweetums?" Nico commented, and while his eyes still glued to the television, scooted over a bit so Will could lean onto him and steal a handful of popcorn from the bowl that sat in Nico's lap. Nico's hand landed on the back of Will's neck, and his fingers threaded through his hair. Will hummed and leaned into the touch. "The worst," he groaned. "Why are people so difficult?" He munched on the handful of popcorn and enjoyed the feeling of Will's hand curling through his hair. Nico nodded sympathetically. "I know, Pookie. There's lasagna on the stove if you're hungry." "Thank God," Will groaned, rubbing his palms deep into his eyes. He turned his face so it would warm against Nico's t-shirt. "So, what's wrong?" Will muttered against Nico's shoulder. Nico stilled for a moment before continuing reaching for a steaming drink on the coffee table, hot chocolate by the smell of it, held in one of Will's favourite old chipped mugs. He had a passing thought for the fact that he didn't own any hot chocolate, but didn't linger on it. Nico held it out for Will to take a long sip, and it was warm and comforting, and everything the day hadn't been. "What's wrong?" he repeated after he handed back the heavy mug. "Why do you think something's wrong?" Nico questioned, his voice a little too aggressive and his eyes averting Will's gaze. His hand dropped from Will's neck, and he tried not to be disappointed with that. "For one, you're avoiding my question." Will pulled out his phone so he could fiddle with it. Nico, he had noticed, didn't respond well when Will's full attention was on him. He pulled up a half-finished game of Spider Solitaire and began shifting little animated cards where he could. "And two, you only come to me when something's wrong." Nico eyed him for a long moment. "Yeah, well, the only thing that happened to me is that Rick and the group have been separated and the zombies are attacking." Nico turned his body back towards the television, and Will eyed the tension in his shoulders. Nico always wore his anxiety like a glove, close and tight to the skin. Will nodded, pretending to accept this, slipped his phone onto the table and turned his attention back to the show. The low, shuddering music indicated something suspenseful was happening, and Will tried to catch up on what was going on. Only a few minutes had passed when Nico heaved a frustrated sigh, and Will tried not to grin at that. "You know how much I hate telling you that you're right," Nico told him without looking at him. "But you're right, something kinda happened." Will shifted so he could look over at Nico, and realised he was still leaning on the other boy more than he thought. Will didn't move, only moved in a little bit more. His head was practically in Nico's lap at this point. "Oh, care to share this with the class?" Nico's hand came up and met with Will's golden locks, his pale fingers threading through the blonde hair nicely. "Are you petting me?" Will asked a little dumbly. He leaned into the touch. Nico ignored him. "I found an apartment," he told him. His eyes flicked from Will's face to the television, a nervous tick under the guise of not wanting to miss the program. Will bit his lip and waited for Nico to continue. "It's really nice, 2 bedrooms and a living room and a kitchen with this huge bathroom. It's not far from the manor, and the rent is reasonable and allows pets, and it's really great." "But," Will prompted, reaching up to catch Nico's hand in the air. Will held it tight until Nico was ready to talk. "It's in this building," Nico stumbled out quickly, finally meeting Will's eyes. He looked tired, and worry twisting with anxiety was clear in his eyes. "It's on this floor, actually, And Will, if you're not comfortable with me living in the same building as you, I totally understand. I'll keep looking. It's no problem. Seriously, it's no big deal at all. Will blinked. It's on my floor? Like a few doors down? Nico nodded shyly and ducked his head, and it was the position of someone preparing themselves to get hit. So? Will questioned. He, logically, saw why Nico thought it could be a problem, and why he should find it a problem, but the two just didn't connect in his head. Will expected a bit more confusion from Nico, but the other boy was always good at hiding his emotions. He lifted his head up slowly and cocked his head to the side, jutting his chin up a bit. So, he repeated, in the same tone Will delivered it. Will, I kidnapped you. You borrowed me, Will dismissed. It was only for an hour? And I don't mind it that much. I've broken into your apartment multiple times. Today. Will shrugged and pretended to turn his attention back to the TV, just in time to see a zombie get decapitated. Go Carol, he remarked, mostly just to tease Nico. Nico's voice was quiet when he spoke. So, it's okay if I move in? Will rolled his eyes over dramatically. Come on, Angelo. Get in the game. You've practically lived here for the past few weeks. Why is down the hall any different? After all, Will flashed his bare teeth at him. Now I can break into your apartment. You could always break into the manor, Nico suggested, and his voice was relieved and light. Yeah, no. That's a no, because I'm not feeling like death by evil overlord just yet. Nico laughed, and surprise, surprise, Will found him beautiful. You're being ridiculous, he teased, his eyes glowing. Will's heart sped up as he and Nico locked eyes, and the room suddenly got so much fuller. Not that, with the third edition of Will's ridiculous, huge crush, it ever got very empty. Will swallowed and tucked a curl behind Nico's ear, and this was important to him. It was important for him to remember how he felt right now, at this exact moment, with the soundtrack of a horror television show playing in the background and the scent of melted cheese and popcorn lingering in the air, and how he absolutely needed to know this. Needed to know this like he needed to drink or water, because being with Nico was like the first bite of a starving man's last meal, and it was like a thirsting man tasting water, only to discover it was poison, but gulping it down anyways, because he wasn't sure if he was going to make it, wasn't sure if it was going to work out or be okay. But dear gods, he could swear every moment had been worth it. Nico. Will grabbed Nico's hands in his, and the intimacy wasn't romantic or affectionate or flirtatious. It felt warm, and it was necessary, as breathing, as the air in his lungs and the blood in his veins. Why did you choose me? Why, out of every therapist or psychiatrist in this huge city, why did you pick me? Nico's lips parted, and his eyes were dangerously dilated, and for a single moment, Will was worried that he was going to blow it off with a sarcastic, snide remark, but instead he licked his lips and leaned in. Because you're the only one as lonely as I was. He breathed it out, his voice weak and shuddering under the emotion. He leaned in, closer and closer to Will's warming lips, for Will could jerk away suddenly. I don't date my clients, Will confessed breathlessly, and his lips cursed him. His lips hated him for saying that, for making them curl around those words when they could be otherwise occupied. A good thing I'm not your client, right? Nico smirked loosely, and his eyes were dark with arousal. I'm just someone who has the bad tendency to do slightly illegal things in order to talk to you. Will bit his lip to hold down his smile. Yeah, I guess that's right. After all the time they wasted dancing around each other, they wasted no more time jerking forward to meet each other. Nico's lips were soft, much softer than any boy Will had ever kissed, and he was aggressive. This showed itself in the fingers that knotted tightly in Will's hair, and how Nico's body curved and pressed around his, in just a matter of moments. Their teeth knocked together, and they both pulled away with heaving lungs and flushed cheeks. Will? Nico glanced up at Will through his eyelashes. How did you know someone was in your apartment? The first time I came over. You've been dying to ask me that, huh? Will laughed, and his cheeks flushed with happiness and arousal. His lips still pulsed from the pressure of Nico's on his. He couldn't help but sigh at a laugh and gave the other boy a smile. Nico, I get notification every time a pigeon so much as looks at its reflection in my window. Someone opening and climbing through? He rolled his eyes. I had security footage texted to me by the time your dirty boots were on my carpet. Nico's jaw hung open. A security system, he exclaimed. Like it's a terrible, surprising thing that a security system caught him breaking and entering. He pulled away from Will's arms to stare at him in shock. I outgrew your system by the time I hit my teens. How did it? Nico snapped his jaw closed. I deactivated it. No. Will dragged the word out and popped the piece of popcorn in. Nico had tasted like melted butter, and maybe Will could recreate the taste. You deactivated one. Nico gave him a bewildered look that screamed, Explain! And Will sighed. I have multiple systems, Nico, he told him. You deactivated one. How many do you have? Nico exclaimed, far too invested in his answer. Like 4 or 5, Will answered vaguely, before shooting Nico a look. What did you think it was anyway? I don't know, Nico spluttered, sitting up now. Some mad-eye moody shit. Not a system. You're far too panicked than you should be about this, Will observed. Nico's shirt was wrinkled in places where Will had gripped at it, and his hair was a mess of curls. You should calm down. I am calm, he exclaimed, exhibiting the exact opposite of calm. I haven't been outsmarted by a system since I was 12. I was beat by a system you can buy at Walmart. Why do you even have so many systems? Don't worry, I won't tell anyone, Will reassured him, patting Nico's hand comfortably. And I've a paranoid father. Nico briefly snapped out of his emotions before leaning in, a little entranced by the possibility of hearing more about Will's personal life. Your father, you say? Nope. Will shook his head, turning up the volume. I did not say. Nope. Come on, Will. Listen up, Nico. Will turned to Nico and made sure to show off the smooth, tan skin of his neck. We can either bicker about me telling you about my home life, or we can make out on the couch until you have to go home, Will said while examining his fingernails. He finally looked up to Nico's dark eyes and curled a single lock of hair around his finger. Now I know which one I am certainly voting for. Will grinned as Nico pounced forward, pinning his shoulders to the plush carpet of the couch. Are you casting your vote? Will questioned, resting his hands low on Nico's waist. Can you be quiet for 5 minutes? Nico muttered into Will's neck, but not much heat behind the statement. Will hummed, It's my job to listen. Literally. I listen to other people all day. Will pulled up Nico so their lips were barely touching. Sometimes I like to be vocal. You're cheating, Nico declared, not yet kissing Will. I don't know what you're cheating at, but you're cheating. Will laughed, and that's when Nico finally decided to crush their lips together. Care to spare something sweet, neighbour? Other than yourself, obviously. Will grinned and leaned against the door frame, staring down the other boy. How long have you been cooking that up? He teased, still blocking the doorway. Since I realised I was out of sugar, Nico grinned. It was good, wasn't it? Why didn't you use your key? Will chuckled. That's kind of why I gave you a key. Nico cocked his head to the side in faux confusion. I thought I had a key because I stole yours in the middle of the night and made a copy. Will waved his hand through the air. Same thing. Anyway, why don't you just barge in your usual fashion? Nico grinned. But isn't this fun? Don't you like our snappy little conversations? Nico ducked under Will's arms and headed towards the kitchen. Now, Sugar Pea, where you hiding the sweet stuff? Will laughed and swung the door shut before following him. Why do you need sugar again? I wasn't under the impression you cooked for yourself. Ever. Will made a sweeping gesture across the kitchen. It seems like all you do is eat out of my fridge and leave dirty dishes. Nico stuck his tongue out at him and turned back to glare at the freezer, where he was apparently looking for sugar. Hazel's visiting later, and I want to make her cookies. Nico paused and held a finger up to his chin. And now I think about it, I may be out of chocolate chips too. Will nodded and began to dig through a cabinet as Nico spoke again. Maybe flour and eggs. Also butter? Or a working oven? Nico jumped up onto the counter next to Will. How about a whisk too? You need those to bake, right? Will stopped and turned to Nico slowly. Nico? Yes, Sugar Lips? Do you have any ingredients to make these cookies? Nico popped a chocolate chip into his mouth, giving Will a look that said, Well, what did you expect me to do? Will sighed but wasn't annoyed. What time is Hazel coming over? In a few hours. Nico plucked the measuring cup right out of Will's hand and began to measure out a cup of flour. That should be enough time, right? I've never actually made cookies. But the website said 45 minutes. It wasn't wrong, right? Will hummed and preheated the oven. That should be fine, he agreed. Why are you so set on making cookies anyway? Nico shrugged, and there was way more to the movement than he would like to admit. He kicked his heels against the cabinets and accepted the mixing bowl Will passed him. She likes cookies. Is that the only reason you're making cookies? Will peeked a look over at Nico while he began to mix the ingredients. Nico, he noticed, was eating more of the chocolate chips than he was putting in the mixing bowl. Nico shrugged and avoided Will's gaze. I guess it would be kinda cool if I could show her something I could do, you know? Get her to stop worrying about me so much. Will nodded. That's understandable. Does she worry a lot? Nico heaved a large sigh. Incredibly. She keeps trying to convince me to move with her and Frank to the camp or whatever. Which, no. And she, wants to meet you. Will paused for a moment. Me? He questioned, feeling a bit flattered. His hands froze over the egg carton before falling down slightly and resting on the eggs. Nico ducked his head quickly, but not fast enough to hide his flushing cheeks. Yeah, I've mentioned you a few times. Will bit his lip a little gleefully as he turned back to selecting the perfect eggs. Don't draw anything from that, Nico warned him. Just because I mentioned you to Hazel doesn't mean anything. Will hummed. I'll be drawing everything from that, Nico D'Angelo, and you know that. But if you'd like, I can pretend I won't be drawing anything from it. He shot Nico a bright smile. Look at me, not drawing anything from that statement. Nico clicked his tongue in a faux annoyance before flicking a chocolate chip at Will's forehead. One less chocolate chip for Hazel's cookies, he warned, and Nico rolled his eyes, but didn't throw any more chips. How's the new apartment coming along? Will licked a stray cookie dough off his wrist and glanced up at Nico. Nico stared at the pink of Will's lips and swallowed. Gods, I'm so lucky you're mine. Will's cheeks pinked, and he gave the other boy a coy smile. Yeah? Nico hopped off the counter and came up behind him. I mean, you make me food and treat me nice. He buried his nose into the crook of Will's neck. And you look like a literal Greek god, so that helps. You just want me for my body, Will declared. That is what's happening right now. I hope you know that. Nico's laugh shook against Will's body. I'm fine with that, he told Will, his voice still muffled by Will's shirt. Will grinned and rolled his shoulders. If you don't get off me, Hazel's cookies will never be baked. He swiped the mixing bowl from where Nico had left it and began to stir. Nico groaned before detaching himself and pushing himself back on the counter. Counters aren't for sitting, Will told him, not actually minding that Nico was in his apartment, using all of his ingredients and sitting on his counters. The only thing he truly minded was the fact his hands weren't all over the beauty of a boy in front of him. Nico rolled his eyes and didn't respond, only dipping his finger into the cup of sugar and observing it for a moment. I guess that makes you my sugar daddy, huh? He grinned, looking at the collected sweetness. Will choked back a laugh and had to set the bowl on the counter for a moment. Nico, you can't just say that. Nico repeated the gesture, dipping the tip of his finger into the sugar, sucking on it. Alright, sweet stuff, whatever you say. He thought for a moment, musing. Maybe that's what I'll introduce you to Hazel as. You will not do that, Will announced, pulling Nico close by the waist. You will not be introducing me as such. Nico leaned into his chest, his hands resting on Will's chest. But what else shall I introduce you as, sweet tums? How about your boyfriend, Will Solace? Will nodded seriously. I think that would be perfect, actually. Nico grinned. And if she asks how we met? I'm not much of a liar, Will admitted. Good thing I'm a good enough liar for the both of us, then. Will cocked his head to the side. But do you really want to lie to your sister? He raised his eyebrows and grinned. Or are you just embarrassed of how we met? I'm not embarrassed, Nico told him, his arms coming up to curl around Will's neck. I'm very proud of my kidnapping skills, thank you very much. So what is it? Will questioned, leaning into Nico's touch. Nico's touch, he had noticed, was like the touch of a feather, light and smooth, but as noticeable and just as important as the rough, wet beat of his heart. It was absolutely, magnificently addicting. Nico tilted his head back, and his hair fell back in a soft curtain around his shoulders. It's just, I kidnapped you, Will, because I was too scared to seek you out, like legally. Borrowed me, Will reminded him. Borrowed you, Nico accepted. I borrowed you from a dark parking lot in the middle of the night. Will shrugged. I'm sure people have met in weirder ways. How did Frank and Hazel meet? Nico gave him a long look. Hazel was lifeguarding and saved Frank from whirlpool about a year ago. They've been dating ever since. Will thought about that for a moment. That kind of sounds like a fairy tale, he finally admitted. Nico threw his hands up. I know, but seriously, how does that sound? I'd rather kidnap someone than talk to her about my problems. Nico's head fell forward. That'll hurt her feelings and stuff. She pretended it won't, but it totally will. Will processed that, and as much as he didn't like lying, it made sense. I still think you should tell her the truth. She'd be more hurt by a lie, and it's always good to hear loved ones is seeking self-help. It might even help her cool off on the worry. Maybe, Nico pulled away. I guess. I don't know. It's okay. Will smiled, mostly just to reassure Nico. You still got a few hours. How about we finish up these cookies? Nico sighed, but it was with a grin. Sounds good, sugar buns. Will you stop with the pet nicknames? Will laughed, not even managing to convince himself that he didn't enjoy the silly little names Nico oh so casually bestowed upon him. Nico leaned forward to peek at the cookie mix as Will started spooning it out onto the metal trays. How else am I supposed to express my sugary sweet love to you? Go write about it in your diary, Angelo, Will teased, his heart speeding up a bit. Will leaned over his shoulder, just in time to see Nico stick his tongue out like a toddler. If anyone keeps a diary, it's you, Solace. Always talking about your feelings and stuff. Wouldn't you love to read my diary? Nico froze for a moment before speaking slowly. You don't keep a diary. Will casually shrugged. Maybe I do. There was a silence, and Will bit his cheek to keep himself from laughing. He slid the pans into the oven before setting the timer, secretly enjoying the silence Nico was shocked into. Come on, Will turned so he could weave his fingers through Nico's and pull them forward, the previous mood forgotten. The cookies need time to bake, and your unending stare will not hurry them. Nico's gaze snapped back to Will, amusement dancing in his eyes. Well, he drawled out, my gaze seems to make you all hot and bothered, so you can't blame me for trying. Will laughed and pulled Nico into the living room with him, a light red dusting his cheeks. They ended up sprawled on the couch together, and, thanks to some careful manoeuvring on Nico's part, he ended up in mostly Will's lap. Neither of them seemed to mind very much. Low music was playing, something that Nico hadn't noticed before. It was some horribly sweet pop song that Will liked, just like all the other horrible music Will liked. Nico supposed it said something that Nico sort of loved horrible pop music now. He didn't try to think too hard into it. Will was watching Nico, waiting. What's up? He finally asked, his voice soft and hesitant. Nico didn't always respond well to direct questions, so he usually kept them sparse. Nico tensed before deflating a bit. How do you always know? It's my job, Will told him, brushing Nico's hair over his shoulder. And, I'm excited to say, I know you. Nico was quiet for a long moment before leaning to Will's touch before speaking, and his voice was quick, as if he was afraid he would never get the words out. Hades wrote to me. Nico swallowed, and he was glad he was facing away from Will. Oh? Will prompted, resting his chin on Nico's shoulder. He wants to meet up with me. To apologize, he says. Nico ducked his head. I'm not sure if I ever believe him. You should do what you think is right. Meet him. Will wanted to tell him. Forgive him. Please don't hold the hurtful grudge I know you want to have. I don't want you to get hurt, he said instead, because it was the absolute truth, and he was Nico's kind of therapist, and he also was Nico's boyfriend. Will, selfishly, couldn't decide which one was more important. I know, it's just, I feel so free, without all the bodyguards, the press, the evil. Nico sighed. I'm not sure if I want to go back to that. You won't have to, Will told him, holding him close. You're an adult. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to when it comes to stuff like this. Will sighed. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a relationship with your father, but I would suggest that maybe you don't go back to the relationship you had with him. Will gave the other boy a small smile and turned his chin so it was facing him. Go to brunch. Talk it through. No one's going to make you move back in the manor or attend to any evil parties, whatever you did before. There were galas, Nico corrected him, leaning his forehead on Will's. I had to wear a tux. Really? Evil galas? Will thought about it. Most about how nice Nico probably looked in a tux. Sounds neat. Nico shrugged, and Will took his hand and held it. I know you miss your father, Will told him, his voice as soft as his loose grip on Nico's hand. I know you miss him. I really think you should respond, even if it's just to get closure. But I'll support whatever you do. You know that, right? Nico nodded and waited a long moment before sighing. I guess I'll text him or something, he muttered, but seemed to have no objection to the choice. Will admired him. I'm glad. Your father seems to love you very much. Nico didn't respond to that, and they sat there in silence for a while. It was only until they were both startled out of their thoughts by the shrill oven alarm that they remembered the cookies. Come on, Will smiled, and Nico took a second to admire how nice he looked. Hazel will be here soon. Let's get those cookies out without eating most of them. Hours later, the night sky was dark and the air was clear with a chill. It had rained earlier, and the grass was slick and the pavement darkened. The disturbed sections of the peaceful scene were scarce and almost impossible to spy. Some examples, such as the slightly crushed grass blades leading up to the apartment building, could only be spotted by the trained eye. Others, such as the single muddy footprint imprinted on the sidewalk, were more obvious, but would be gone by the morning. Inside the apartment building, Nico had long since abandoned his messy boots and thick wind jacket. His phone was nearby, but off. A mug of cider steamed, but remained unstipped. The only thing that seemed worthy, or capable, of Nico D'Angelo's attention at the moment was a thick, leather-bound book. The material was quality, though the aged leather seemed to be more of a factory than actual age. The boy flipped the pages carefully, but quickly, as he mentally devoured the book. Nico held the book carefully, his eyes only barely leaving the pages to glance up at Will, as the other boy shuffled in the room, a thick blanket wrapped around his bare shoulders. Will sprawled out next to him, the heat radiating off Nico, tempting and entrancing. You found my diary? He questioned, already knowing the answer. Nico took a moment, then to carefully press his thumb onto the paper where he was reading before flipping up his sharp gaze to meet Will's eyes. Found? He repeated in disbelief. You say found as if it was lying round or resting on some bookshelf. He sighed for a long moment. No real frustration in the movement. I had to break into your godforsaken office at 3 a.m. Will, I scared half the life out of some poor squirrel that had been sitting on a window ledge, and almost got in a fight with a raccoon that was hiding in the dumpster. And after that adventure, I had to hack past several security systems, all encrypted with various languages. Thanks for that, by the way. And a literal vault, for God's sake, Will. And then, after all that, around 3 or 4 hours of high mental straining, breaking in a fucking dollar store combination padlock. It's a wonder how you got past the padlock, Will muttered into the couch. His hair stuck up in every direction, and his cheeks were red with warmth. Really? That's what you take away from this? Not the fact I broke into your apartment to get your diary? It's a nice office, Will mused, curling closer into the other boy. Did you say hello to Soren? Did I? Will, of course I said hello to Soren, but that's not the point. You always seem to have a point, Will told him, his eyes sliding shut. Why don't you come back to bed and we'll talk about it after this wonderful point I'm sure you'll have in the morning. Nico groaned, his grip tightening on the book quickly. Just a few more minutes. What part are you at? Will smiled into the cushion, secretly pleased Nico was enjoying his words so much. That time I broke in while you were in the shower. Will laughed. And when I came out, you were already sprawled across my bed in a pair of my pajamas. He hummed under his breath. I knew you would enjoy that part. I thought you would enjoy the detail about the maple syrup the best. You knew? You knew? What do you mean? I can't... Never mind. Nico threw his hands in the air, the book dropping onto the cushions. Never mind. You know what? It's bedtime. Nico stood, pulling Will with him. Will leaned sleepily onto Nico, pressing his cold nose onto the other boy's neck. Nico groaned, taking most of Will's weight. "You are so making me breakfast in the morning." Will hummed into Nico's neck. "Pancakes?" "Oh gods, yes," Nico agreed, dropping Will down in his bed before curling up next to him. "Banana flavouring?" "With chocolate," Will agreed, holding his arms open. "Now come here." Nico complied, pulling the blanket around him. "Hazel's coming for dinner," Nico muttered. "She likes you." Will grinned and pulled Nico closer to him. "I like her too. She's great. I loved her story about you in the Hawaiian shirt." Nico hummed pleasantly. "You will never speak of such story again." Will laughed, low and tired. "I will speak of such story again. Often. Passionately, with much gusto." Nico elbowed him, but it was too soft to cause any reaction. "Be quiet," Nico ordered him, his voice full of warm affection. "It's bedtime. Go to sleep." Will tightened his arms around the other boy, and Nico enjoyed the feeling of safety that came with the movement. The silence was warm, and only interrupted by the soft, occasional click of the ceiling fan. "Have sweet dreams, sugar lips," Nico muttered into his pillow, as his eyes fell shut. Will opened his eyes, and through the darkness could just make out the sharp, pale lines of Nico's cheekbones. Will pressed his lips to the back of his neck, inhaling the clean scent of Nico's peppermint shampoo, mixed with the faint traces of the cologne he had put on before Hazel arrived. Will supposed it wasn't fair how, after everything Will loved so much about the other man, he had the nerve to perpetually smell good. He also couldn't find it in him to care very much. When Will's eyes finally flooded closed for the night, Nico's breath had already evened out, and his snores had already begun. Hours later, while both were heavily asleep, Nico's arms would find their way around Will's waist, and the sheets would drag and tangle at their feet. Hours later, when the birds would start to sing, and Will, of course, would be the first to detangle himself from the bed, he would take a moment to drape a soft blanket, Will's favourite, across the other boy's bare back. Hours later, Nico would wake to a symphony of sizzling pancakes, cracking eggs, and the clashing of dishes, and he would muster a smile through the haze of early morning exhaustion. Even more hours later, when the fragrance of breakfast had long since faded, Hazel would knock on that front door, and would spend dinner hiding smiles in her sleeve through bites of her ravioli, and so many hours in the future, at the point where trying to measure the difference in time by hours is a bit ridiculous. Nico would bend at the knee and hold up all of his hope, all of his insecurities, and all his love to Will, as well as a little black box, and Will would choke on his emotions before choking out his answer and pulling Nico up into his arms. But none of that mattered right now. All that matters right now, as Will falls asleep entangled with the man he loved, was that it seemed that he had finally found his sweet dream. Okay, that's finally the end of And How Does That Make You Feel by Rosyredlipstick. The notes at the end of this are, this is the 6th work in my first meeting Solangelo AU series. Follow me on Tumblr for short stories and weird ramblings, if that's your thing. It's rosyredlipstick.tumblr.com. My words were not wording today, as you could probably hear, and thank you so much, my Sunbeams, 100 subscribers. This means so much to me, more than you could actually ever know. And I think I'm going to do a 100 subscriber special, and I have a fic that I was planning to release in April, but it's actually one that I wrote myself, and it is completely unhinged, but I think it would be perfect for the occasion. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. Before you go, please go on AO3 and give Rosyredlipstick the kudos that they deserve, please. This is amazing story, and I can't thank them enough for giving them the blanket permission for me to use it. I loved reading the story. Well, enough said. Thank you so much for listening this far, and I hope you have a wonderful day or night.